Okay, I guess we can go ahead and just start introducing ourselves. We have a little bit um, of a joke for you too here. Always good to start with some levity, talking about anything related to the medical school admissions process, as it were. So my name is David Kelly. I'm currently a preliminary resident at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School in Newark, New Jersey. And then Dr. Berman.
I'm David Berman. I'm a recently retired general internist living in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah, and so we kind of do this session every year. I understand that for a lot of you that may be either just starting high school or now just starting to look at colleges, maybe. Some of you in college as well, a little bit closer to the process. A lot of this may seem really far off, but I think our goal with this session in particular is to show you um, or maybe illuminate some of those building blocks, things that you can start doing now, whether you are, a freshman, sophomore in high school, all the way up through college, things that you can start doing to prepare for medical school. It is a really longitudinal thing. Very few people decide to go to medical school on a whim and are successful with it. So, it can be really important to start these things in advance. And so that's kind of what we'll be talking about today. Um, we won't hide anything from you. This is kind of the summary up front. It's number one, it's very important to be a good or great student. That has been number one for a long time as far as medical school admissions committees are concerned, and that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. The way that medical schools are accredited and the way that they're kind of graded themselves, if you will, it's based on how well their students and their graduates perform on standardized tests. So they want to know that you're going to be a good test taker and you're going to be a good learner. So being a good student, making good grades, starting in high school, and certainly in college is number one. And part of that is studying hard. Medical school is challenging, even once you get in. This lecture is more geared kind of towards getting in, but once you're there, it is difficult. It's a rigorous curriculum. And so developing strong study habits at the start will really set you up for success in the years to come. And then again, this is all interlinked, developing good habits as far as study skills, as far as life is concerned. We talk a lot about sleep hygiene these days. It's something we could all probably do a little bit better with. And so things like that we'll discuss a little bit as well. And then lastly, do keep your eye on the prize. So your long-term life plans, your long-term happiness are what's important. Very few people make it all the way through this journey without at least one or two major setbacks. And so it's really important not to let those completely derail you. And it's important not to let those things get in the way of living your life, if you will. So yeah, Dr. Berman, I'll defer to you.
Well, I just grew up in a small town in Oklahoma with a undergraduate in botany and spent my career working in internal medicine. Next slide. I've practiced for 1 year in a small town in Colorado and then moved to the Denver metro area where I worked for a large prepaid practice, about 600,000 patients. And at the end of my career, I managed about 100 different physicians. And so I'm familiar with hiring new physicians and kind of what we were looking for good physicians. Next slide.
Yeah, and so I am also kind of sort of from Oklahoma, if you will. I also spent time in Washington, D.C. and in the Netherlands growing up. I went to NYU for undergrad, and I was very involved in HOSA actually in high school and college. I ended up being National HOSA president in 2012 through 2013. So if this is your first International Leadership Conference, welcome. I'm sorry we aren't able to meet with you in person this year, but I know firsthand how much time and effort it takes to make it to the ILC. So certainly, glad to be able to meet with you virtually. And then I just graduated in May from the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine. And as I said earlier, I'm now going to Rutgers for my ophthalmology residency. So I think the first thing when you're looking at, what are the building blocks to a great medical school application, and deciding how you're going to get into medical school, and what you're going to do as far as your medical career, you should decide if this is something that you want to do at all. People talk about going into medicine for the right reasons, and there are a lot of reasons that are quote unquote the right reason. First of all, I think you have to enjoy challenges. Being a physician is really committing to a life of lifelong learning. Um, and that doesn't stop as soon as you graduate college. It doesn't stop when you graduate medical school. It doesn't stop even when you finish residency. So there's constantly new things to learn. And so in order to do best by your patients, you have to really be passionate about continuing to learn. In that same vein, you need to be interested in science. That's, of course, the basis of medicine. You need to be interested in how the body works in general, anatomy, physiology. Those are things that you can get exposure to in many high schools. And so it's something that you can start to explore at an early age, and make sure that it's a subject matter that, that really drives you. In addition, you need to be really empathetic and sympathetic towards people as well. You need to care about people. You need to care about their problems. You need to care about their pains. You need to be a good listener as well. When patients come to physicians, they typically aren't having the best day in their lives, and so they can be more difficult to deal with. And certainly, a big part of being a physician is learning how to listen, learning how to communicate. And it can be tough sometimes to work with people when they're not having a great time. And so it's important to be really empathetic and to deeply care about each and every patient that walks through your door. Lastly, you need to be intrigued by the ways healthcare can be used to improve life. Healthcare is a big, massive enterprise. And you always have to be looking at ways that you can do best by your patients. This isn't a job where you can necessarily clock in and go by the book and clock out. You really have to think about what you're doing at every step, and because what may be great for one patient isn't going to work for another patient based on a variety of factors, maybe that don't even have to do with their general health. So yeah, very, very important to enjoy learning and to enjoy working with people in difficult moments.
There's really, when you say I want to be a doctor, you're really talking about literally dozens of different kinds of jobs. Most of you are probably familiar with your own doctor, who might be a family medicine doctor or a pediatrician. Some of you may have actually had a surgery at some point in your life, and so you're familiar with what a surgeon is. But there's literally all kinds of different doctors. So you're not really saying I want to be a doctor. You're have a big menu of what kind of doctor you might want to be. So there's sort of the primary care doctors. Internal medicine is basically kind of like a pediatrician for adults. There's many kinds of surgeons, heart surgeons, brain surgeons, kidney surgeons, and many kinds of medical specialties, which you may have heard of, like a cardiologist, or with the recent pandemic, many of you become familiar with what an infectious disease doctor is, or even an epidemiologist. Next slide. OBGYN, that may have been the doctor that delivered you, or if you've had to go to the emergency room, or a doctor that reads x-rays, or radiologist. There's also many different kinds of settings. So you can be a general internist in a big town, and that's completely different than being a general internist in a small town. Even though you have sort of the same hat, the job is actually very different. And you can be involved in educational, administrative, all kinds of different kinds of jobs within that.
So looking at kind of the long road ahead for those of you who have decided you do want to become a physician, there's an undergraduate degree, so college, that's usually 4 years. You see linkage programs. Some schools that have an associated medical school will allow you to do all of your pre-med coursework and apply after 2 or 3 years. So that's certainly something to look into. A lot of state universities have started to do that. Medical school is generally 4 years, although again, certain schools have tried to shorten that to 3, and that's something that's kind of an active transition that's taking place in some parts of the country. And then residency training is after that. So that can be, as you can see, from anywhere 3 to 8 years, depending on what you want to do. Of course, college and medical school, you're generally paying tuition to those places. Of course, there are scholarships available. We'll talk a little bit about financial stuff a little bit later. But then in residency training, even though you are still training, it's important to know you're no longer paying tuition. You're now being paid a salary. So that's kind of a caveat to the fact that we include residency in our education, but the financials there work differently.
If anything that you can sort of take away from this, and if you want to take any notes, write down this: the AAMC, which is the accreditation body for medical school, and they have a very robust website which you can look at both now and as things change over time, between now and if you're in high school over the next 4 to 6 years. They will update the website based on current conditions. So it's just take a look at it. It has a lot of really great information. Or if you just Google the AAMC aspiring docs, it'll take you to their website.
So looking at what you can do in high school to prepare for college and medical school, I know a lot of you are either just starting high school or you're getting closer to looking at colleges. Some of you may be already accepted into colleges, but again, number one is going to be academics. So in particular, you want a good foundation in math and science. So those are your biology, chemistry, physics courses. And you'd like those courses to be AP or advanced placement if possible. That shows initiative. It shows that you're able to keep up with a rigorous coursework. Again, start developing solid study habits now, because really, even if you're someone who's able to kind of breeze through your high school classes easily, when you get to college and then when you get to medical school, if you haven't built those solid study foundations, you can start to see weaknesses. So really putting in the work now, even if you don't necessarily have to do it, will reap dividends in the future. Test taking skills are still incredibly important. To become a physician, we're constantly being tested in various ways. And so, really making sure that you're good at multiple choice tests in particular, never too early, essentially, to start working on those skills. And then written and verbal communication skills. This is something that 20 or 30 years ago, medical school admissions committees didn't seem to care as much about. They wanted all of the metrics, the highest grades, the highest test scores. But now they're realizing that patient care has a lot to do with how we interact with our patients as well. So they're really taking into account things like the personal statement, things like extracurricular activities, and then also the interview that pretty much all medical schools will do prior to admission. They really want to know that you're able to connect with patients. They want to know that you're able to educate your patients. And so again, developing those verbal and written communication skills, again, starting now, it's only going to be great practice for when you're expected to do that when you apply. But of course, be a great student. That's number one. As far as extracurricular activities, volunteering or working in a medical setting shows that you kind of get it. You've been on the ground there and you know what it's like, and it's something you're interested in. So in general, they want to see that you're able to stick with something. So as you can see here, we talk about shadowing. You know, it may be difficult to get 100 hours of shadowing, particularly right now in the middle of a pandemic for maybe the y'all that are applying this upcoming year. There's a little bit of flexibility because of the pandemic, but they in general want to see longitudinal experiences. So they want to see that you didn't just work somewhere for 4 hours and then go somewhere else for 2 hours and maybe spend 8 hours in a third place. They want to see that you're able to pick one thing and commit to it. So, you know, 50, 60 hours over the course of a couple months at, you can see here, a homeless shelter, a hospice, a nursing home, or a hospital. You can also look into summer programs or internships. Again, right now, these things, opportunities might be limited, but in coming years, I expect that to, those things to open back up. So those are always good. And then mission trips as well, no matter who they're sponsored by, takes you directly, you're face to face with a patient population. And so you can really see how you could develop empathy. You could understand what we say when we mean you need to care about people's concerns, about their pains. And that also allows you to understand some cultural differences, no matter if you're traveling out of the United States, perhaps, or within the United States as well. Cultural differences abound anywhere. And so that's a great way to get some experience with that. And then tutoring as well. You can see here again, you need to be a great educator to your patients eventually. And of course, you need to be a great educator to the medical students in classes under you. As a resident, you'll be teaching medical school students as well. So tutoring is something that they also like to see on a resume for that reason.
In terms of which college you should attend, most students that end up going to medical school come from a larger state college or a university. And rather than a city college, do you need to go to a large private school or a prestigious private school? Not necessarily. And in fact, that may put you at some competitive disadvantage. The competitive schools, you're likely to have a lower GPA. And the private schools are actually much more expensive as well. Should you attend a city college or local college? Generally, those are looked at as less competitive. Even though you may get a great GPA, you're less likely actually to score higher on your MCAT score. That's the standardized test, which David will be talking about more in just a minute. But if you do need to go to a smaller city college or local college for some reason to start out there because of financial reasons, work reasons, or family reasons, try to at least transfer to a larger state university for the last couple of years if possible.
And then of course, yeah, once you obtain admission to the college, hopefully of your choosing, then the next decision you have to make is a degree. And it's true that most medical students have a degree in the biological sciences, so that's biology, chemistry, or biochemistry. It's certainly not something that is required. So all that medical school admissions committees ask is that you choose a degree in something that you're passionate about, and also that you complete a certain number of, let's say, pre-medical or pre-med courses that in general are listed here at the bottom. And there will be some slight differences, but in general, this is what they ask for. So taking these courses doesn't mean that you can't fit in a major in the arts, for example. And oftentimes that's something that might get you noticed by an admissions committee, because if they see 83 students applying that have majored in biochemistry, but only one has majored in classical cello, they may be inclined to look at the cellist, for example, because they know that you have a passion outside of medicine, and they are looking for well-rounded people to serve as physicians. Now, just briefly, the Medical College Admissions Test, or MCAT, is something that people generally take about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through their college career, assuming they decide to go to medical school right after college. That's generally when they would take it. And I think the best way I could describe it is it's really a test taking test. So it's looking at reading comprehension, critical thinking skills. They're going to give you a lot of information and ask you to synthesize that information and then answer questions that maybe can be extrapolated from the information that's given you. Now you can see that there's a chemistry and physics based section. There's a section that is exclusively critical thinking and reading comprehension. There's a biology and biochemistry section. There's a psychology, sociology, kind of behavioral section as well. And so these, you do need to have a strong foundation in these in order to kind of know what they're talking about in the questions. So I don't mean to say that, it's not important to memorize some things, because it certainly is. This is a test that you have to practice for and study for quite a bit. But it's a little different than a simple multiple choice where they ask you a question and you're expected to just immediately know the answer with no more information. A little bit about how it's scored. Um, it's scored by percentiles essentially. So you don't get a report saying that you got 99% of the questions correct or 73% of the questions correct or what have you. It's scored against everyone else who took that exam. So on average, all applicants, so people who take their scores and decide to use them to apply to medical school, between 505 and 506 as a score. And then of those accepted, the average is 510 to 512. And you can see here that a score of 507 is actually at the 80th percentile, which of course is below the average score for all accepted. So that's not put there to scare you, but just to let you know, it is a difficult exam, and it's an exam that a lot of people take. And so it's important to, to get it right the first time, if you will, to take it seriously, to really work and study and practice quite a bit in order to do well and get into this competitive range of 510 to 512.
What GPA do you need? Well, the higher the better. And here's just kind of a breakdown of how it works. If you had a 3.8 or higher in college, about 2/3 of the students were accepted. So even a 4.0 doesn't guarantee that you're going to be accepted. If you go to a school that's a college that's less competitive and your degree is sort of fluffy kind of courses and you get a really great GPA, but you really don't understand the basic sciences like David was talking about, you're not going to score as well on your MCAT score. So it's really a composite of your GPA, your MCAT, your interview, and your personal statement that determine your acceptance. But you don't necessarily also have to have a perfect GPA or a GPA above 3.8. So 3.6 to 3.8, about half the students were accepted. 3.4 to 3.6, you can see that the rate of acceptance goes down as your GPA goes down. And below 3.4 in college, it's going to be very challenging for you to get accepted to a medical school, even if you have a high MCAT score. You can see this is how some of the students who are accepted from the private schools, Harvard, Stanford, et cetera, about 3.8. The state universities, this is the medians are about 3.6 to 3.7. So that's where most students are going to be accepted. So you don't have to have a perfect GPA. In terms of the interview process, each school will have its own system. When I went to med school a long time ago, I actually served on the interview committee, and this was kind of their scoring system. We had 3 different interviewers: a faculty, clinical faculty, a regular faculty, and a student. And each person scored the applicant.
And then this is actually just a slide I added very recently because virtual interviews and virtual visits are something that's part of our reality nowadays. And so the pandemic has caused a lot of changes actually to the medical school admission system, um, some of which are probably here to stay. So you can see at the bottom, I think it's most likely that a hybrid system will persist and that um, certain aspects of the experience will continue to be virtual, which can be a good thing as far as finances and travel time are concerned for applicants, especially if a lot of schools happen to be interested in interviewing you or having you for tours. But then it also causes some difficulty as far as choosing maybe which school is right for you. It's hard to get a sense of a program's culture over Zoom or over WebEx or what have you. And so I don't think that a completely virtual experience and a completely virtual process are something that will continue post-pandemic. Um, so you can see applicants spend less on travel with this kind of system. They aren't able to get as good a look at the school though. Um, In-person interview skills still apply. So if you're maybe applying to colleges right now, this is something I'd certainly urge you. You still need to practice this. Eye contact is still important, even if it's just eye contact with a camera versus having an interviewer in the room with you. And then now we see that technology and AV have become a factor. So um, it's not ideal, certainly, for those things to play a role, but as far as internet access, having stable Wi-Fi or internet connection, having good lighting where you are, and being in a quiet, somewhat professional looking place that you can, that you can put your best foot forward at, if you will. That's very important. And so again, those skills are something that'll continue to be developed by all of us as we move into probably a somewhat more virtual world in the future. As far as preparing for interviews, like I said, all of this still applies, whether it's virtual or in person. Um, Mock interviews, mock questions, maybe with faculty or mentors that you know, other adults. It's actually probably best if you don't know the person who's interviewing you because it's higher fidelity, right? You're more likely to take their questions seriously and answer them seriously. I think it's important to know you don't have to know the answer to every question that's asked of you in a college admissions interview or a medical school admissions interview. It's a perfectly valid answer to say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll be happy to get back with you. As long as you do then get back with them, whether that's via email or phone call in the future, because a lot of these questions, they'll be asking you about a time when you experienced a particular when you had a particular experience, and you may completely blank, and rather than making something up, which some people would probably try to do and would likely get caught on, I think it's important to be honest. And if you can't think of something, say, I can't think of something. Do you have another question for me? Certainly talk with other medical students or college students who recently have been through the interview process. So if you have friends in classes above you, that's probably the most valuable resource at your disposal when preparing for some of these, because they might have interviewed at some of the same programs and they might be able to give you a good idea of the questions you'll be asked and the settings in which you'll be asked them. One interesting thing, you can kind of develop rapport with folks that are on your interviewing team. So there's really, the way these interviews work is everyone is interviewed, and as Dr. Berman said a little earlier, often there's a scoring system. But really, those people are going to be your advocates. So in general, these schools are interviewing a lot of people. So not the same person is going to be interviewing every applicant. And so it's kind of going to be up to the people who did interview you to kind of champion your application in a large group setting. So I think it's important certainly to, um, to point out where you have similarities as far as resume perhaps, or personal background with the faculty that are the medical students. If you end up being interviewed by some medical students, um, you know, really make them feel like you would be a good colleague to them, because that's really truly what they're looking for in these. As far as how many schools you should apply to, the golden rule is you should always apply to your state medical school. Um, and then in general, when you're looking at private schools, which most people do to some extent, you should know that they're about 2 times more expensive in most cases. Again, there are outliers, and they're likely more competitive as far as gaining admission. The more places you apply, the more places you're likely to be invited to interview. So the more interview experience you can get. So you can imagine if you receive interview invites at several schools, maybe enough that you aren't really interested in interviewing at all of them. It may still make sense to attend those interviews and schedule them earlier, perhaps, so that you get some good experience answering these medical school admission style questions. So when you get to the schools that you are really interested um, in attending, you're much more prepared for that interview. You should also notice, though, that it's not free to apply to medical school, and it's certainly not free to travel for in-person interviews. They can get very, very expensive, in the thousands and thousands of dollars. So something that's important to keep in mind from the get-go. Certainly don't just check every box as far as which school you want to apply to. You also need to look at what your long-term goal is. So when we talk about these private schools, they're being more competitive and certainly much more costly. You would ask, well, why do people go then? And in general, going to a really big name school can, in the future, land you possibly a big time academic job. So if you're interested in being the chair of a department at a large private university, probably good to go to that university's medical school. If you're interested in, clinical practice, for example, becoming a primary care physician in maybe a rural part of your state or country, maybe just fine to go to an in-state, a public school. And then same with research. You want to look at the background as far as research of the schools you're applying to make sure that it jives with what you want to do in your future career.
Some of you may or may not be familiar what an osteopathic medical school is. And so basically there's sort of 2 degrees. One is called the MD medical doctor, and one's a OD or DO called an osteopathic doctor. Historically, and I'm sort of talking about decades in the past, the osteopathic schools really did not have the clinical rigor that they do today. And so for the most part, the osteopathic physician was kind of looked down upon. And that's been changing over the last few decades. There's interest in moving to a national accreditation body. I think their mission is more to ideally to train general practitioners, family medicine, internal medicine, to go out into rural communities. The average score for getting in terms of GPA and MCAT is considerably lower than it is for the medical school. So many students who don't score as well on their MCAT and GPA typically will apply to an osteopathic school. Now, many people, as David alluded to earlier, if you have an osteopathic school in your state, most people will apply to the MD school and the DO school in their state because you're trying to maximize your opportunity to get accepted at any medical college. Mm-hmm. What happens if you don't get admitted the first time? Well, 90% of the time students get in on their first attempt, but that doesn't mean that you can't get in if you get rejected on your first attempt. So try again. If that's something that you really want for your career, if possible, try to contact someone on the interview committee or the admissions office to see what you can do to strengthen your application and how you can improve. You then want to spend the next year either going to school, trying to improve your GPA, or maybe taking the MCAT again to try to score better. Or sometimes you may want to take a gap year to try to reevaluate what you want to do with your career and do something else, maybe some volunteer work like we talked about before, to do anything you can to improve your resume. At that point, if you really realistically look at your GPA and MCAT scores and you've decided you're not going to be able to get into a medical school, there are many alternative careers that you can do to be involved in medicine. And that doesn't mean that you're contributing any less to the healthcare, physician assistant, nursing, physical therapy. There's all kinds of jobs, and HOSA is really a great organization for exposing people to a great multitude of career choices.
As far as finances, of course, there's good news and bad news. In general, the good news is that a career in medicine as a physician in particular puts you in a very high income category in terms of career earnings, even though you may not start earning your full salary until, let's say, your early 30s, for example. Even looking at that, lifetime earnings for physicians are much higher than the general population. Of course, the other side of that coin is that loans in the six figures, as you can see, for undergraduate combined with medical school loans aren't unusual. So if you think about it, that's the price of many homes. And so it's almost like having a second mortgage payment that you're having to make every month. So just something important to keep in mind. It's not difficult to get loans from the federal government in medical school because, again, they know that you're probably going to be able to pay them back one day. But something, again, to always look at, and certainly to look at if you're starting to look at colleges and maybe you're receiving scholarships to an in-state public school, but not to an out-of-state private school that you're accepted at. Just looking at maybe the long-term cost of college plus medical school and what those numbers could end up looking like for you in the future. Again, not something we put here to scare you, just something so that you're aware, as you start making these decisions of schools to go to, always look at the price tag as well. After medical school starts, so far we've been just talking about gaining admission and preparing for that starting in high school and in college. It is a difficult curriculum, as I alluded to earlier. However, the kind of competition that you may feel with other pre-med students, perhaps in your college or even in high school, that really stops. So medical school is a very collaborative place. You certainly need kind of study groups and study buddies in order to do your best on your exams. There is still some competition for residency programs, but because it's so nationalized, it's certainly not at the level that I would say pre-med competition is, even within schools. And then you can always fall back on what they call the person that graduates last in their medical school class, and they call them doctor. So something to always keep in mind, as we said, there will be setbacks. Everyone has setbacks, but don't let those get in the way of your goals, and don't let setbacks get in the way of your general happiness. Because if you're going on this journey, you're spending a good portion of your life on the journey. So don't think about it as the kind of situation where your life only starts after you graduate medical school or after you finish residency, because you're living your life through it as well. And I think it's important to keep that perspective.
Lastly, just remember, again, if you take any notes today, remember the AAMC Aspiring Docs. Look on there specifically in college about the medical school admission requirements, And David has written a blog in the past, which you can refer to, which he's kept. But we want to give some time to answer some questions. So
yeah, I think we have one other small moment of levity, but we do have some time. So if anyone does have questions, feel free, to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask away.
Hi,
so
so I have a quick question.
Mhm.
Will this PowerPoint and any materials be made available to us?
So this Zoom session is being recorded, so it should be available on the HOSA YouTube channel. Now, whether that'll be immediately today or maybe a couple days after the conference, I don't know that, but they will put it up on YouTube, so it will be there.
there's a
Sounds good.
couple of different questions that showed up on the sort of the blog, and it's sort of like you're not sure about what you want to do in terms of career choice. Um, so I think the main thing is just start college and start with some general foundation courses, which you have to do anyway, and then try to get familiar with people in each of the different kinds of professions. Meet as many different people as you can, be they a doctor, physician assistant, or a nurse, and spend some time with them and ask them what their career's like, what their day's like. Um, and it is highly likely that you may change your mind. I changed my mind more than once in college. I started out wanting to go to med school. Then I decided I wanted to be going to environmental work before I decided I wanted to go back to med school again. So it was something, a career choice that I almost went into completely different than medicine. So it's actually quite common to change your mind more than once.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a graduate. I just graduated and I'm going into UCSD. So I was wondering if it's beneficial or if it's even doable to be a varsity athlete and be a pre-med student and also getting enough MCAT preparation and enough volunteering experiences, or do you think being a varsity athlete would actually take away from that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think it's a function of how confident you are that you will be able to keep all of that up. So there's a common story among people who want to go to medical school, and that's that they say yes to too many things and they stretch themselves too thin. And when you do that, you aren't able to excel at anything because you're trying to do so much. Um, with that said, certainly being an athlete is one of those things that makes you obviously a well-rounded person on a resume, on a medical school application. So it's certainly something that I think is great. But to your point, if you think you can keep that up and also fulfill rule number one, which is being a great student, making good grades, and getting good scores on standardized exams, then absolutely go for it. But I think going into those things, those types of really intense extracurricular activities, same thing with working through college, having a job, um, same kind of story there. I think it's important to evaluate whether or not it's really taking away from your college experience and your ability to excel academically, or if it's adding to it. So yeah, I'd say there's certainly no rule against it. I think it's fantastic, but do always be evaluating, is this hurting my grades in any way?
Hi, my name is Erin, and I was hoping you could give me some tips on finding scholarships.
Yeah, so that's certainly a big question. I don't know if I have any specific tips. I know HOSA offers scholarships, so I don't know if you've explored applying through that. But any organizations that you're in high school or in college will probably either have a scholarship program or they'll have opportunities for scholarship outside of the program. So certainly, the big thing with scholarships is just applying. And even though you may not get one, you may not get the second one or the third one you applied to. If you apply to enough, eventually you're increasing the chance that you'll get selected for them. So I know this sounds more crude, but just going to Google and typing in scholarship opportunities, I know there are a lot of great databases out there for compiling scholarships. And so, yeah, we're really looking for them because a lot of times people aren't looking for them. They'll only accept scholarships that kind of fall into their laps, if you will. Maybe when schools offer admission, they'll also offer a scholarship at the time. But there is a wide world beyond that most people don't look at. And so, yeah, just doing a little bit of research into what you might be eligible to apply for, and doing so well in advance, of when you would need to apply, is important. So I'm sorry I don't have anything more specific for you than that, but they are out there, and there are good resources online if you just look.
I think most universities will have a scholarship office that you can check with. But as David said, if the scholarship office is going to be missing a lot of scholarship opportunities that exist out there. So a good Google search will help with that. There's one question about, is it okay to major in something non-medical? And I think we addressed that in the talk, but you can literally major in anything that's offered at the university, but you still have to take a lot of math and science courses because a lot of the MCAT is going to be focused on math and science. And in fact, the career of medicine is heavily biologically and chemistry based. So, and math is a obvious foundation skill for excelling in chemistry, physics, and biology. Other questions?
Oh, yes. Hi, my name is Trey, and my question is, as an upcoming senior, when's the best time to start applying to colleges? Like, should I start this summer or should I wait until my senior year actually starts to get a feel for something? I don't know.
Can you say that one more time?
My question is, when's the best time to start applying to colleges? Should I start this summer or should I wait until my senior year actually starts?
So that would be a question, I'd say, more if your high school has an academic counselor. I'm not sure these days as to when it starts, but I do know some universities do still work on rolling admissions. So it's important to get your application in early in a lot of cases. For other schools, it may not matter because they don't do rolling admissions. But yeah, certainly, I don't think it's ever too early to start getting your application together, especially if you're having to write a personal statement and edit it several times. So yeah, but I would defer to the experts on that question. We also had a question from Wesley in the chat asking about an EMT course, working as an EMT as an undergrad. Yeah, certainly, things like that. Medical school admissions committees love, but the same thing as being a varsity athlete. That's a lot of time, it's a lot of commitment. And so really going into it again with a clear head, with clear eyes, knowing that it could be something that could become an issue for you as far as time management, as far as being stretched too thin. But yeah, I think it would be a wonderful thing to add to your resume. Just have to make sure that you're able to maintain good academics at the same time. I think we maybe have time for one more quick question. I think they're going to kick us out here at 3:20.
I just wanted to add one other thing to that. The most typical student that goes to medical school is going to go to college and then go to medical school right away. But increasingly, people are applying to medical school later in life after they have some kind of career. So if you end up, becoming an EMT and you do that for 5 or 10 years, and then you want to go back to school and get your coursework done and apply at a later age. That's increasingly happened, although it didn't happen so much in years past. I've seen some people that they're literally engineers or for 10 or 15 years and then apply to medical school and end up becoming a hand surgeon. So there's all kinds of career paths to get into medical school.
I think we are just about out of time. So I've just put my HOSA specific email in the chat. So if you guys have further questions that you didn't get to share yet, either for me or for Dr. Berman, I can certainly forward your questions to him as well. So feel free to jot that down if you do have any more questions. But we've really enjoyed getting to talk with you again, even though it's virtual this year. Like I said, I appreciate how much work it's taken for you to get to the ILC, whether it's for recognition of service or it's because you've excelled in a competitive event. It's really something, again, you're currently doing what we've been talking about, which is making sure that you'll have things to talk about on your application eventually and in your interview. So thank you so much for being here and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice day.